So what is privacy by design? It's one of these terms that you've been hearing about, and you are hearing about more and more. But the thing is that the concept has been around for a while, actually. It was born in Canada. So, and more specifically, it was born in Ontario, since it was in Quebec, the then Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, who coined the term for the first time. And the concept has been evolving, has been gaining traction over the years, and until the GDPR came. So what happened? What did the GDPR change? Well, basically what it did is that it made privacy by design a full-fledged legal requirement for the first time.
So privacy by design is not a requirement in it of itself. It's rather a way to kind of get organizations to think about all the requirements from the get-go at the outset of a project. Currently, there are 2 privacy bills on legislative floors. One in the federal level. So that's C11 for the slang. I'm gonna try to use that from now on. And then in Quebec, there's the Bill 64. And C11 is very principle based, so there's no very clear requirements on such matters. In Bill 64, although it is not stated as such, in my opinion, there's a privacy by design requirement. So Bill 64 again is applicable in organizations that operate in Quebec, so not for everyone in Canada.
Right, so that was a small snippet from our previous session. And where in that session, we were focused very much on the legislation, but today's session is actually focused on the how. So we've got 3 member firms, 3 Canadian member firms that are going to focus on their products and services and how they've adapted their products and services and embedded privacy by design principles into their products. So let me introduce our great panel. So we have Mark Rowan, he's CEO of Data Sentinel. We have Mario Cantin, CEO of Prodago. And we have Anthony Decristofaro, who is CEO of Qnext. So to kick things off, maybe Mark, could you just give us, everybody just give us a short intro about yourself and your company?
Sure, happy to. Mark Rowan, I'm a co-founder and CEO of Data Sentinel, as Donna pointed out. I've been in the data management business for probably about 20 odd years, focused in overall enterprise data management, data governance, and over the last 5 years in the data privacy space. As Donna also mentioned, we are a Canadian company headquartered here, and Data Sentinel has been purpose-built to address the kinds of challenges that we are expecting to see in the Canadian marketplace as it relates to things like understanding your data and understanding your risk and compliance related to that data. Thank you.
Mario.
Yes, my name is Mario Cantin. I'm the CEO and founder of Prodago. So Prodago is a Canadian-based firm dedicated to governance. My background is data management in all its facets and data governance in particular. I definitely have a special interest in both privacy and AI, in the sense of privacy being a core and a key element of governance that basically dictates many requirements and many elements we see around governance. So around privacy, my special interest. So I recently actually did a certification on privacy management. That's just a reflection of how important privacy is within the world of data governance. So that topic is really a key element. Also a very specific interest in the governance of AI. So my firm Prodago has been selected by Gartner as AI governance tool vendor. So the challenge of embedding privacy in AI processes is a very a key interest of myself and in my firm. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're going to hear more about the governance angle later on in the session. Anthony, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Anthony Decristofaro. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Qnext Corp. We've been a Canadian technology company focused on really the last 6 years in providing a protection and access to your data of a hybrid infrastructure. What it really means is we unify the access, the governance of data storage across multiple domains and environments in a zero trust architecture, which you'll hear more and more over time regarding the protection against cybersecurity.
Thank you. So if any of you tuned into the first session, you will realize that the privacy legislation is very complex. So I'd like to just start off by getting each of your opinion on what you think are the most challenging components of the legislation. Mario, why don't you start?
Yes. So the most challenging aspect is, and you just mentioned it, it's the sheer complexity of it. So how do you go from high level regulatory requirement that cover many aspects? So how do you translate high level requirements into applicable and actionable element? So first element of challenge is a translation challenge. So translating regulatory requirements into applied requirement. So for example, let's look at the right to opt out from GDPR. So GDPR prescribed that as a data subject, you can opt out of an automated decision. So how do you go from the requirement to be able to manage opting out into the organizational plan to manage and align on such a requirement? So beyond compliance, it's about all the processes and accountability to align on very detailed and very diversified requirement. So for the right to opting out, you need role and responsibility to define principles, to define directive, to define guidelines on how the organizational internally should address such a topic. You need role and responsibility to process the request to opt out. You need the role and responsibility to confirm. So again, this challenge to translate high level, often requirement in the form of principles or sometimes very specific into actionable elements. Look at the Bill C11 that's coming with the right to data portability or data mobility. So as a person, you can ask an organization to basically transfer your information to another organization. The complexity to respond to such a requirement is a key challenge. So again, under the right to portability, it's managing all the requests from data subject to move the organization to another designated organization, but it's also internally, how do you extract, process, confirm? So a challenge of translation. Another challenges, I would say, is the sheer number of regulation. So these regulations are coming in fast, and they're coming in with more and more constraint. So a challenge for organization is to not only address the complexity of operationalizing alignment with the regulation. It's also keeping up with new regulation that are coming in and the added complexity. So the challenge to be agile regarding this requirement is a very important challenges. So new regulation on privacy, but you see now new regulation in Europe regarding specifically AI. So, and these new AI regulation, they also cover topics related to privacy. So it's not only very specific privacy regulation, other regulation are also implicitly covering privacy requirement. So two main challenges to translate from high level into operational aspect and managing multiple regulation requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually moderating a panel this afternoon that's on the U.S. Privacy laws. So that I'm looking forward to understanding those nuances there. But so, Mark, what are your thoughts on this? Where do you see as the challenge? You see the dynamic nature of these requirements.
Happy to add to that. And by the way, Mario, so completely agree with what you're describing as well as a primary driver that is causing challenges. But then we layer on top of that. So if that's the bottom layer of the cake for making an example, then layer on top of that complexity of systems and data holdings that exist within enterprise in Canada today. You've got companies that have hundreds of data sources. You have organizations that have accumulated petabytes of data in many cases across structured data systems, so on-prem systems, hybrid cloud systems, and just the vast quantity of the data that needs to be managed is creating an enormous challenge. Add to that the complexity of the data. You've got email systems, you have file management systems, in addition to traditional enterprise warehouses. And the regulations that Mario was describing articulate that you need to be able to track and manage things like PII or sensitive data across that vast ecosystem of information. So how do you do that? And how do you comply with those regulations without automation being a key element of it? But more specifically, how do you leverage those data assets to confidently grow your business, knowing that you're compliant with the regulations that are coming into the Canadian marketplace? And then the next layer of the cake is, well, it may not just be Canadian regulations that you're concerned with. It could be global regulations. And your data assets are distributed around the world in some cases. And you do need to be considered, you need to consider those types of assets and the laws that you're exposed to geography by geography around the world. So the problem becomes a multiple the larger the organization is, to the point where it can be daunting.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, how about yourself? What do you see as a challenge?
Well, actually, some of the information Mark and Mario explained and overviewed, I totally agree with. I think they're quite focused on the governance. There's other elements to this which obviously bring in the security of the data, and I think Mark mentioned that. But I think the most challenging part when we look at, part of this is part to do, as Mario explained, with artificial intelligence, is the challenging aspects, I would say, we can see around the proper applications of the rules in a way that continues to promote business interaction. So the automated system needs to be able to properly distinguish between the right amount of information to be released based on the contextual interaction given the applicable rules. So contextual rules application is key. And I think to add part of that is that the second most challenging aspect we can see is around the ever-changing and evolving rules and context. In other words, the system, whatever systems we are trying to bring to bear here, needs to be able to adapt and evolve along with the rules, also in kind of an autonomous or semi-autonomous fashion. So, that's kind of my quick capsule on it. But
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. And maybe I'll segue you into the next question as well, which one of the comments from Dominique in our last session was that data privacy is a business issue. Would you agree with that comment? And if so, like, who do you think owns this problem? If we take a typical FI as an example.
Yeah, that's a loaded gun question, but I will certainly try to give my opinion. I think if I were to take a position, let's call it, I would say that it's not solely a business problem, because we have a lot of movement, a lot of creeping, a lot of changing happening with life and happening with our information and our data. And I believe that the responsibility lies between individuals, which we should have some kind of control, government and businesses, right? Government should set the rules, and individuals should be able to provide with the means to control their privacy level, and businesses should be able to be responsible and apply and enforce, right? And apply and enforce that. But it is a complicated connecting the dots situation. But at the end of the day, the individual should have control, right? To some extent of that control. And it is a delicate balance, because business has to, we're in a new age, and business has to build business. And so unfortunately, it builds business on data. And so that's part of it anyways.
Yeah, I think this dynamic aspect of the life of the privacy rules, like they don't just, it's not just a rule that you have to do an annual attestation or something like that. It has a life, it's dynamic. And so I think that this this ownership is very widespread, and so the knowledge share and talent is a very interesting concept. Mark, what are your thoughts on who owns it?
Yeah, I was going to provide a couple of real specific examples, actually, of what we're seeing in our client interactions today. I think historically, you'd look for the head of data governance, or you'd look for the CDO to take responsibility for data within the organization. But in the context of what we're talking about, I think organizations are exposed to some fairly negative consequences when you think about if there were to be a breach, as an example, and you think about if you are not compliant with the regulation, what is the impact of that to the organization? And you get down to things like reputational damage within your industry. You talk about financial fines. And then, of course, there's litigation, which we have begun to see occur within the Canadian marketplace in particular, along with some past negative impact that was derived through some data breaches. And that, of course, drives class action suits. So the exposure to organizations is significant and can get into the range of hundreds of millions of dollars. So who owns that problem? That's certainly not the data governance head or the head of or the CDO. It's really the board. It's really the CEO. And there's a group of people on the committee that we've seen who are participating in these sales processes with us and in the investigation and requirements process with us. It's the CEO, the CIO, the CDO, risk and compliance, head of risk and compliance, and the CISO. And of course, then the chief privacy officer, which is a new role that's evolving in the Canadian marketplace, but we do see already in Europe and in certain elements of the US marketplace. So our view is that it is a business problem, and the most senior people within the organization have a responsibility given the potential downsides that we're seeing in the marketplace today.
Yeah, thank you. I want to just encourage the audience to send questions throughout, because we don't have to leave them to the end. So if you have something that you want to tag, just send the question through to me. Mario, I'm going to move you on to the next question, because I want to make sure you guys have a good time to talk about the systems that you're working on. But there's a real the whole data privacy, there's a massive emphasis on customer expectations, right? And so can you just kind of think about and talk about the opportunities that these might present FIs. Like, so, you know, it is a complex, very big law to comply with, but at the same time, with a different hat on, you might see it as an opportunity. Can you just think about that and give us your views?
Yes, definitely. Customer expectation regarding privacy. So we see this in all our currents and daily input of the need, the expectation of people for their personal information to be properly managed. So customer expectation is there. So as such, you know, the challenge for organization is really responding to these key expectation and these key challenges. We see the need internally in organization to align with requirement on privacy, but also on element of regarding privacy, and regarding other topics. And I'm sorry, I'm losing my thoughts here. But so the challenges here again is for organization to I would say embed privacy in their DNA. So the opportunity here is for organization to react and understand these customer expectations and to see this beyond a need for regulatory compliance. There's an opportunity for organization to really change the way they're doing things and to make the management of personal information part of their DNA. And there's a great challenge there. So how do you really embed the management of personal information in part of your DNA? So it needs to go beyond compliance. So compliance, responding and being able to say, yes, we're compliant. But how do you really manage the risk related to privacy? You know, risk of not being compliant is one thing. Operational risk is another thing. Mark mentioned risk related to reputational risk. So these are drivers for organization and opportunity for organization to change the way they do things. Mark mentioned the need to have a top-down approach. You need the CEO to really own this. You need the board to say this is important for the organization, and that's an opportunity to drive this change. So ownership at the top level is a key element. Now who owns this? So owning the direction is one thing. How does it translate? We see this as an opportunity to improve collaboration within different sectors. It means you might have a chief privacy officer who will own the privacy requirement, translate and manage the core capability. But we see increasingly the need to collaborate with the chief data officer. So you cannot manage privacy if you don't actually classify your data the proper way. So this is an opportunity to improve collaboration between different stakeholders in the organization. And this need and this opportunity to change the way things are done, we see this specifically in the context of automated decision system. You know, you will not succeed at managing privacy within your automated decision system without a strong need and a strong line of direction from the board. You won't see it without the proper leadership of the chief privacy officer, and you won't succeed without the CDO acting as a conductor in terms of the operational practices to to align the operational element within automated system. So an opportunity to improve collaboration between different stakeholders, driven by a need not only to comply, but a need to support these new customer expectations.
Thanks, Mario. Mark, what about yourself? What do you see as some of the opportunities for firms?
Yeah, and I think there is two sides to the sword, right? So there's obviously the regulation, and if you don't do this, these bad things are going to happen to you. But on the upside, if you are implementing a sound data governance program, you are investigating your data from the perspective of sensitivity. You can also do so from the perspective of quality. At the same time, you have the ability to know and understand all of the assets that exist within the organization in structured and unstructured sources, and you're governing them appropriately. Now you have the opportunity to confidently consume that data for your business purposes, those intended business purposes, and that you can trust the data that you're producing because you put in place all these different programs to manage it more effectively. So you know when you're using those assets for your analytics or for your operational systems, that you've got compliant, trustworthy, correct data that will, at the end of the day, here's the kludgy little term, but you can sleep at night knowing that you've buttoned it down to the degree that you need to, and it's extremely well governed.
Yeah, there's a real balance, risk reward. So now, the whole purpose of today's session is really to dig into the practical and the how. And we've got these three great firms here. So Anthony, I wonder if you could start us off kind of in the core part of the session. Can you just talk a little bit about your product and service and how you're embedding privacy by design into your product development efforts, and what can customers expect?
Sure. I think one of the things, it's interesting because we're talking about a lot of governance, a lot of the rules, a lot about how we deal with the data. But we have to understand that, you get a compromise and there's 100 million people's personal data out there, right? So cyber hygiene, or the lack thereof, is really one of the greatest causes of cyber crime. So it's not so much that these bad actors are so good. It's just that people leave very basic things undone. And so when it comes to what we end up doing or helping corporations is we end up taking the data, which could be, as Mark explained, in a hybrid infrastructure, could be on-prem, could be in Azure, could be in a cloud. And we take that and then we put controls. So we put micro-segmentation controls of this data. So one of the key purpose or objectives of our platform is secure and protect all the data and the information, as well as keep the platform secure. And given the primary function of the application, if you do a secure transfer, or if you access something, whether you're a remote workforce or whether you're on-prem, the transport of the data from source to destination, we ensure that only the authorized user has access to that data and guarantee that the data reaches the intended recipient. Our platform helps, individuals, it helps corporations maintain compliance, but it is the policies set by the company and enforced by our platform that helps with the entire compliance. And we secure that data, and we make it very productive because very soon, in the next month or so, we're going to be completely integrated into Windows, and that means scaling thousands of employees overnight, plug and play. And even though all this auditing is going on in the background, even though you're encrypting a pipe and going point to point, the user will never know that background of security is being done, and keeping that user and that person very productive, and the corporation having that control, I guess, that helps with compliance and policies of the company.
So I didn't know about that little tidbit about integration to Windows. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit? What that?
Yeah, so when we say we're integrating into Windows, we are as a technology platform. So when you enable FileFlex in a large company, we automatically would, where your C drive is, And Donna would open up her computer wherever she is in the world or a notebook and see File X drive. When Donna clicks that, you're going to get all your content on SharePoint, all your NAS, all your market, whatever you're allowed to access. And it could be some of it view only, could be some of it you're allowed to share. It's just there with a click of a mouse. And then you want to share it with somebody again, point, click. And now all this is being audited, Donna. So as soon as you share a document with Anthony at 12:01 and I open it at 12:02, that's all audited. And then there's alarms being set. For example, Tesla got broken into a couple of months ago with one employee internally who took 26,000 files to his Dropbox account. And a lot of it was IP and a lot of it was that. Like we would have had an alarm that said within 10 minutes, hey, this gentleman has moved already 20 documents to the Dropbox account. You want to check into it. So all of this is about trying to bring security and compliance to the data portion, whether you're remote, whether you're on-prem, whether your content is anywhere in the world.
So I guess COVID has been good for you.
It's really, yeah. And, but I will say one thing, that all of these listeners in general, there is a big movement going to what's called zero trust architecture. President Biden, a week ago, did an executive order so that the federal US government is going to zero trust architecture and all its subsidiaries. And that sets a big tone because you put a big bet on zero trust. And what that means is trust no one, verify everything, and give them access only to what they should have, not the infrastructure. And it's a big shift going away from VPN, virtual private network, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners are using, and all of it's going to zero trust. And it really simplifies the system better, and it becomes more productive, and it becomes more cost effective. So it's a mental state that really has to be starting to shift, and we're pretty excited about that portion.
Sounds great. Interesting. Thanks, Anthony. Mark, now over to you. Tell us a little bit about how you're embedding privacy by design principles into your products.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, Data Sentinel helps organizations understand what sensitive data they have, understanding where it is, understanding exactly what it is, classifying it, tracking it, and tracing it as it moves around the organization, and measuring it against policy, and then calling out remediation in near real time. So if data were to move from holding A to holding B, and it wasn't supposed to be, that particular type of data wasn't supposed to be in holding B, it would cause a remediation action to occur. It could set off fireworks, or it could mask that information, de-identify that information, depending on the policies of the organization. So at its core, it's a deep discovery engine that does that work. Now, what makes us, I think, a little bit unique is that we have the ability to do that at scale and to do that performantly, which is a huge challenge when you think about the ecosystem of some of the organizations that exist in Canada and the size and scale and complexity of the data. Not only does it do that at scale, but it also does that across hybrid deployment type technologies, so multi-cloud type environments, on-prem environments, or combinations of all the above. Across also the other great challenge that we see in the industry is third-party systems. Excuse me. So it could be a Salesforce as an example. Well, you've got accountability for the data that exists in that Salesforce instance. So you've got to manage that. You've got to govern that appropriately. You have to track and trace sensitive information that could be in your Salesforce instance. And on and on and on, many examples of all that. But I think the other side of the equation that makes things a little bit unique within Data Sentinel is when you think about then how do you execute against this? How do you do it? And that's where it gets really kind of challenging. So we've adopted this audit process. So let's baseline where you are today. Let's take a look at the current environment. Let's figure out the good and bad and the ugly associated with the data holdings that you have within the organization. Let's put in place a remediation strategy that might be part of your overall governance program, your overall privacy program, a combination of those two. And then we implement Data Sentinel persistently within the organization. So it's always hunting. It's always looking for those exceptions to policy as data moves around the organization, or you're bringing new data into the organization through an acquisition or through just the common business practice of bringing in third-party data into the company. So we, at the end of the day, we have the ability to be able to tell you what's in your data, classify and track it, measure against policy, remediate, and then take the appropriate action to lower your risk and to ensure you're producing high quality, compliant, well-governed data for consumption within the organization.
That third-party risk element, I'm sure you're getting lots of queries about that. You know, we know OSFI's looking at updating their reg, you know, later this year on B10 and there'll be a focus on third parties. So I think that's really important. It's a great feature you've got there. So Mario, let's unpack your product. Very focused on operational processes. Give us a sense of how you are embedding privacy by design principles into your products.
Absolutely. So our take on privacy is we govern privacy. We're in the governance of data management, so the governance of data quality management, the governance of ethics, and the governance of privacy. What we do for our clients is that we actually help our client to embed privacy principle in their processes. So it's about helping our clients to make privacy part of their DNA. So what we do at Prodago is that we are, I would say, master interpreters of privacy laws and requirements, not in the perspective of compliance. So we're not lawyers, but we pre-mapped and we've pre-interpret several several privacy laws and requirements from the world, and we've for each of these laws, for each of these for each statement of these laws, we've pre-identified the operational requirements to align with these laws. So we've mentioned at first that one of the core challenges is just the sheer complexity of the privacy law. So we've predefined the operational requirements, the operational playbook, and the cartography of who needs to be involved in the organization to basically be aligned on GDPR, on PIPEDA, on Bill C-11, on HIPAA, on Alberta Health Information Act. So we've done this translation in the form of IP and content. It translates basically into detailed operating practices. So for Bill C-11, we go at a very level of detail. We've got 360 operating practices that needs to be implemented throughout the organization to align with upcoming law and Bill C-11 requirement. So interpreter of this. By doing this, what we do, basically, we're able to help organizations to baseline what they have. So we help them to assess the different processes that they have, that they do not have. They're able to identify the risk inherent to the gaps. So these risks becomes driver to act. So a lot of detailed requirements from laws and regulation. So we have an operational interpretation of these requirements. We help our organization to baseline their current state, assess the risk inherent to the gaps, and basically accelerate and drive the transformation. So we see the challenge as a challenge of transformation. How do you go from not managing this, being forced to comply with all these requirements? So how do you plan this? how do you identify all the right stakeholders? How do you plan? How do you prioritize your action? So because we've done this pre-interpretation of the operational requirements, we help organizations to accelerate their transformation, their readiness in terms of processes in order to be ready to comply. We think it's a lot about building internally for organization the agility to respond to regulation. So because we have this operational interpretation of different laws and requirements, we help organization to implement these processes. Okay. We help organization to transform, to clarify the role and responsibility, and thus gain the agility to face the new requirements that are coming. We decoupled the operationalization from the law, thus gaining the agility. So what we do specifically for automated system is, because we do this, we're able to embed privacy operating practices in AI lifecycle. Okay, so this is where it becomes truly privacy by design for automated system. We've identified the operational requirements from different laws and regulation. We help organizations to embed specifically the requirements in their processes. So again, it's about transformation. It's about clarifying role and responsibility. It's about defining who does what. And it's also about prioritization. So where do you start? What do you do first? So by linking the what needs to be done to the different risks inherent to not doing this, that becomes a way to prioritize action. And finally, the core element we do at Prodago is this registry of operational practices. I mentioned 360 that's a lot. Okay, that's a lot. So you don't need to embed 360 operating practices into AI processes, just a small subset. And one of the key is to be able to segment these operational requirements, for example, along AI adoption stage. So if you're just experimenting with AI, well, your level of governance will need to be adjusted. So you don't need the same level of governance if you're just experimenting as if you are industrializing the AI through organization. So one of the key success factor is being able to progressively implement the right requirements into your automated processes, not to kill AI project with too much governance. So you want to have a clear understanding of the specific requirements and be able to grow your organization as you adopt AI and as you keep aligning on privacy requirements.
Yeah, AI being another really big topic for firms. What I like about what I'm hearing here is, I mean, there's the complexity of the regulation, but you can't underestimate the extent of actually having to implement, and the fact that there's a foundation within your product for firms to build on. So I assume they can customize, even though you have mapped the operational processes to a level, is there some customization that can be layered on, in order to align with their ERM?
Absolutely, and that's the whole objective here is to accelerate organization into their readiness. So we come in with pre-mapping from laws and regulation to the operating practices and pre-alignment with element of risk. The idea is this is the template. This is the starting point on which they need to align. They might decide to prioritize compliance with Bill 64 that's coming in Quebec. So that might be helping to prioritize and identify a subset of the focus they want to bring. But the idea is this registry that comes and accelerate organization is then ready to be customized for organization to reflect their own internal processes. But the idea is this pre-mapping is truly an accelerator for organization to be ready. Then our technology, as the components are being implemented, help an organization to govern these operating practices. So pre-mapping of what needs to be done, and then the capability organization to select and prioritize what they want, to customize the operating practices based on their context. And as they implement the different pieces, then they start to govern them. They start to ensure that the roles and responsibility are aligned, and they build the trust that they're being effective, compliant, and principled in their management of private personal information.
So thanks, Mario. This audience is proving me wrong, because I said that we were going to get lots of questions, because our last session, I couldn't keep up with the questions. So before we go to our last question, I'm going to add one in. Surprise question from Donna. One of the things that I think is important with RegTech is the ability for firms to work with other firms, because you can scale better, right? And this is a prime example of a regulation that is highly complex. And so, could one firm, is there the ability for one size fit all is highly unlikely. I'm not sure, because we haven't prepped this question, who might want to talk about this, but have you started talking with other firms to collaborate and to provide a more holistic solution as you are engaging with your customers? Mark, you're nodding, so you're getting this question.
Thank you. As a matter of fact, yes, we have. Both from a number of perspectives, actually, and this has proven to be extremely interesting. We have partnerships with law firms, with insurance companies, not from the perspective of an insurance company being a client, but from the perspective that they're trying to sell breach insurance. And there's a challenge in the marketplace around understanding what the risk is before you write that policy. So partnerships with those types of professional service organizations, with advisory consultancies who are providing top-down advice on how to comply, and technology companies that are compatible with who we are and what we do. Could be a data catalog company. They will remain nameless at this point. It could be a company that's focused on building data fabric for large enterprise. Many of those kinds of organizations, as well as consultancies that are focused on things like data governance. So our partner ecosystem is getting pretty big based on the compatibility and the like-minded approach to this type of problem that we're talking about.
That's really good to hear. I think it's essential. Like I often sit on panels, like as a RegTech expert, I'm always given that question. Like, and I think it's really important for us in Canada to do that so we can scale. Mario, do you have anything to add, or Anthony?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like from a Mark perspective, we position ourselves as a transformation enabler in the context of privacy. So our ecosystem in the same way grew with a system integrator, where the need to do this is just a core element. We're being poked by law firm who basically do a legal interpretation of law. Okay, what's missing is the capacity to translate this into an operational plan. So okay, you've understood what needs to be complied with, and your minimal compliance requirement. Now, what's the plan? How do you identify the stakeholder? So definitely this ecosystem is a key element. What we're also seeing is that we're the umbrella. We govern the operating practices, and we see that many of our operating practices basically points to great technology, that the one from Data Sentinel, to be able, from a more operational perspective, to actually get the job done from an operational perspective. So our technology, our approach allow an overarching view on all, a unified perspective on all these components, and the need to integrate and point to different technology is part of our daily activity right now. Meaning this is the synergy between the overall umbrella and the applied perspective.
Thank you. I have a question from the audience. Anthony, I'm going to pass it to you initially. How do these privacy implementations translate cross-border? Is that something you can discuss?
Was that directed to Anthony?
Yeah, it was, but we might have lost him. I can't see him. Do you have
cross-border? Sorry, I didn't know. I was wondering. I think because we're involved, at least from our platform perspective, US has guidelines, Canada has guidelines, Europe has guidelines. Quite often GDPR, for example, that was started in Europe, is now everywhere in terms of its rules. So our system is flexible enough to be able to adopt and give that empowerment to the organization to tweak and tune.
Perfect. Thank you, Anthony. I have one more question. I'm going to give it to you, Mark. Is it possible or suggested to integrate more than one privacy solution?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you could have, there's a privacy stack of technologies that are described in various different ways. And within that ecosystem of technologies, there's everything from business process management oriented types of technologies, and Mario's been describing to a certain degree elements of what his platform does in that category. And then you drill all the way down to where we live, which is in the, that heart of data and understanding data. So we're a bottoms-up kind of technology company where we're focused on the data element specifically and how to manage that within the organization. And there's layers in between of all kinds of different technologies. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share a graphic that kind of describes what that ecosystem of technology looks like once we're done with the session.
Well, maybe we could share it in our next newsletter, Mark.
Happy to.
Okay, yeah. All right, we've got our new newsletter design. Okay, so we're at the end, and I just want to close out a little with one closing remark from each of you. On the question is, where are we going from here? Because I hear we're getting evolution, a little bit of GDPR. There's a lot of complexity, across the world. We're at different stages. So Mark, you're on the screen. So you start, but short and sweet, please.
Short and sweet. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from GDPR. It went active a number of years ago. Organizations tried to do the minimalist approach to compliance. They made it an administrative activity. One of the stats that I read this morning in preparation for today's session was that there was over 100,000 data breaches in the last 24 months within the European marketplace. That would suggest there's room for implementing automated technologies to help manage compliance a little bit more effectively.
Certainly. Mario, closing marks.
Yes, so more and more regulations. We see this, and the new regulation they are adding more constraints to the other ones. So I think the real need that's being asked for at this point is the need for agility. Okay, and it truly relates to one of the core challenges of organization to build resilience. Okay, so how do you so in terms of privacy requirement, building resilience means building agility. So we need to be less reactive to new regulation and how we're going to react. Okay, organization needs to start thinking more proactive about building capability react. Okay, this is the new way of things. Okay, of being forced to manage a privacy requirement and to manage a customer expectation from that perspective. So need for agility, the need to be proactive about this, the need to think of it not only in terms of compliance, but in terms of privacy by design, of embedding privacy in the DNA of organization. I think this is the new reality.
Thank you. Anthony, closing remarks.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot has been covered by Mark and Mario, but you know, Mark has talked about the breaches and Mario's talked about the flexibility, and I agree. I think that we're going to have to make sure there's a balance between also securing the data and then giving the flexibility and the empowerment properly so that it can move according to the rules, because these rules will be changing.
That's interesting. The empowerment, it's because really ultimately it's us as the customer that want that control. So
correct. Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for joining and participating today. And I want to thank the audience for joining us, and I want to thank EY for sponsoring the event. And I would also let you know that our next session, our final session on privacy, is on data privacy and the cloud. And we'll have Microsoft and EY and a law firm to talk about that, because they're actually in the legislation, there are a lot of elements around the third-party use. That is up next week. Thank you all for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. It was great session. Thanks, everyone. Mario, Mark.
Thank you. Great to meet you guys. See ya.